All right, I am very excited to jump in before we go to Ja-Nae and introduce our last speaker, Ja-Nae Duane. And following Ja-Nae will also be a Q&A, so please, similarly to the great questions people submitted for our first round, feel free to send comments, questions, and we will have the opportunity to ask her after her speech. Ja-Nae is an award-winning expert on global networks, and she's focused on the question, how do we make life better for 1 billion? She's a researcher and a PhD candidate, and she's focusing on the research of future of information systems. With Singularity, she focuses on systems of the future, and she's here with us today to share some interesting perspectives. Ja-Nae, I turn the stage over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it. And hello to everyone. I hope that you're having a good afternoon. Raise your hand if you've enjoyed the talks by John and Jonathan. I know that I have. To build off of what John and Jonathan have talked about earlier, we are living in a challenge without precedent. No one would deny that. From the bubonic plague to the Spanish flu of 1918, the repercussions and effects of pandemics have changed the way that societies function. And out of pandemics, we find that status quo no longer is relevant and that the systems need to change. But what is different about this pandemic, say, versus the Spanish flu, is that now we're globally connected. And so we're not just seeing the destabilization of a healthcare system, but we're experiencing destabilizations across our supply chain, within our workforce, within our information systems, and within our global economic systems, just to name a few. Many things that we know within our businesses and within our industries, well, they're just becoming obsolete. And so restrictions associated with COVID-19 are putting many industries at risk, and many businesses are closing their doors and going out of business. The pandemic and associated restrictions will hurt companies of all sizes as revenues start to dry up. The consumer confidence indicator from OECD shows a pessimistic view towards the economy that will result in consumer tendencies to save more and consume less, which, as we all know, is pretty comparative to the 2008 recession. Additionally, some of the shifts that we're seeing in European consumer behavior that are typical of what we're seeing across the globe are that consumers are obviously spending more time online, much like yourselves, hello, but are also are looking for ways to do business online and remotely with either companies or industries that they're used to doing things in person. And so this has been problematic for banking in South America. This has been problematic for luxury brands here in Europe, with the ones that I've spoken with, because they're used to having that level of experience in person with their customers. However, customers want to do things digitally. And so what we're seeing is that many companies are rethinking what that customer experience is. And these are just some of the trends that we're seeing globally. Though I want to build off of something that John said, though these are things that we're experiencing from the pandemic, these shifts have been occurring for some time now, right? As Jonathan says, over time, everything changes. And it was great to see that map of the world. In many ways, what we've been going through since 2008, this pandemic has just accelerated that. However, we're still working and operating in a model that's built out of the Industrial Revolution, that button seat where we're working at the same place in the same factory from 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. and then doing the same thing over and over again. And the thing is, we all know that that model no longer exists. The factory model is dead. We are constantly connected to our phones, to our computers. We are working remotely. We can be reached at any time. For many folks, you're working at any time. And so these lines between personal time and work time have blurred, which is also enhanced, to build off of what John said, have enhanced our emotions towards both work and our personal time. And so what this pandemic has done is just accelerated this process. Like any black swan event, it's disrupted all of our systems. It's disrupted our business as usual. And the problem that we really face today is that our business models and our systems are still stuck. They're stuck in this old way of doing business. And if we don't change this, if we don't change the way that we approach business, then there will be dire consequences. However, what we can do is consider this an opportunity. What if we consider this pandemic a stress test on our business systems and a way to expose our vulnerabilities? Look at how your company or how your exec team have responded. Both the detection of infrastructure breakdown and responsiveness of companies tells us a great deal about whether or not we should really support our current systems that have strong foundations, or if this is an opportunity to create new ones. In times of crisis, just like an individual, all companies resort back to their safe zones, to what they feel comfortable with. And so companies respond, and they will tell you that in organizational resilience, well, we have to get back to business as usual. But really, how a company responds is going to tell you whether or not resiliency is about really supporting the foundations of that current structure or creating new ones. So, how can we find some of these important changes before the second wave of the pandemic hits? Together, I will walk you through a few ways that we can start to reimagine the types of strong yet adaptable systems that we all need to thrive in today and tomorrow's environment. Are you ready? Okay, well, let's get into it. So, as we chatted about earlier, our models are shifting. That includes a centralized business model where everyone comes to work in the same locations. Customers have only one role to buy from you, and that your suppliers are placed around the world where the costs will be the least amount of money. But this model is quickly being erased. And so what we're seeing is a new way of doing business. We're moving into a world of distributed business models. Now, distributed business models are primarily concerned with access to global talent, access to cost effective manufacturing, access and direct access to target audiences, but in a cost effective way. We are seeing more and more companies being forced to create distributed models due to the pandemic. We are also seeing a wave of companies, including Twitter, who are moving to a fully remote distributed workforce. And we'll continue to see the number of companies do so increase. However, a company that's been doing this for years is Automatic. So Automatic, who owns WordPress, Tumblr, along with many other products, has been a distributed company for over 15 years now, with over 1,200 employees in 77 countries, speaking, I believe, 93 different languages. And there's no office whatsoever. Everything is done online, where they use Zoom or Slack and Google Docs. And the teams only come together once a year for a retreat. So otherwise, this company has been entirely virtual and has been paving the way for a distributed workforce and a distributed business model for years. So for you and your business, start to think about ways that you can shift from that centralized model to a more distributed one. Building off of the distributed business model, also find ways to shorten your company's supply chain. Now, I know that we've talked about supply chain a little bit earlier today. A major reason for the shortages that have occurred during the pandemic is that companies have outsourced production. And so production goes to low-cost regions globally in order to keep costs down. Well, these strategies rely on forecasting based on historical data. However, that data does not consider disruptions such as a pandemic. And so this has caused a major disruption. And because of this disruption, many companies are finding that they have to use their local maker spaces in order to create additive manufacturing instead of having their products and parts shipped to them. Some companies have even shifted to sending materials directly to consumers that they know have 3D printers so that they can print them at home. Formlabs, which is based here in Boston, is revolutionizing 3D printing in many ways, and I love using them as an example. They are not only seeing an increase in 3D printing farms that are popping up in secondary and tertiary cities, but Formlabs themselves was became the first 3D printing manufacturer to receive authorization to make 3D printed ventilators or adapters for ventilators here in the US. Now, this totally opens up the world of 3D printing. So, when you think about where 3D printing was, based on the example that Jonathan gave, to know that 3D printed adapters for ventilators are now being used in a pandemic, that's really powerful. So, for you, start to think about ways in which you can shorten and maybe distribute your supply chain. When I work with senior executives, they're usually planning out for 5 years, planning out until, you know, we'll say 2023, 2024. Now, why? Well, they prefer to do long term planning in a way that they can set course for. It's a very linear approach to business, and it's being able to have that strategy provides a level of comfort and a level of assurance. However, it does not help you forecast for the future of your business or identify ways in which disruption can occur. Instead, have your team do adaptive scenario planning. Now, adaptive scenario planning allows you to not only come up with best and worst case scenarios, but to identify across multiple scenarios, how are they interlinked? Where are the advantages for your company across all of these scenarios? If disruption occurs, where are those vulnerabilities? Where are those problematic areas? What types of disruptions will impact your business or your industry the most? Can the core business really just stay the same across all scenarios? Or do you have to come up with modifications or a whole new core business? The key here is to really maximize the opportunities while minimizing the risks into this whole new future. And once you have looked across multiple scenarios, identify where the opportunities in your industry are headed over the next 20 years. Part of minimizing risks is by enhancing value. I find that many companies are still moving towards digitalization. Now, what do I mean by that? They're moving from just using digital systems to creating and capturing value through digital transformation. So as we move into digital transformation, your business will have a blend of both creating additional value with new products and unique customer experiences, but also capturing a significant value primarily through data that can be activated in a way that really makes sense for your organization and for your customers. Think about what value no one else is building yet. Where is there an opportunity that has very little competition, if no competition at all? In biology, which Jonathan will love, competitive advantage is short-lived. Co-evolutionary spirals are called red queen races. And say that 5 times fast. But they're named after the red queen in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. And so if you're not evolving and moving into a new area, well, then you're just running to stay ahead of the competition. So what you want to do is capture lasting value and build something that's new that no one else can touch. A company that I think is doing that really well right now is called Spatial. So the future of work is not Zoom. It is the ability to work from anywhere while having holograms of your teammates in the same room as you. It's the ability, just like Iron Man, to use documents and work on them in 3D in the center of the room. And there are others who are doing VR. And I know that Aaron Frank is going to do a breakout session in VR later and can walk you through some other companies. But none of them are really allowing you to use any device with a combination of augmented reality with virtual reality and your phone or your computer the way that Spatial does. They have found a new market with very little competition as we move into this new virtual workspace. Recently, we are seeing more and more companies make a shift from incremental innovation with closed insular systems to a more open networked approach that allows for companies to focus more on radical innovation. Now, why is this important? Well, two main reasons. Number one is many companies are finding that they have to make these changes in order to keep their core business going, and they have to make them quickly. But they can't do that alone because of the organizational slack that exists, as well as the cultural mentality that we're staying the course. We have a linear approach, and only making small changes to the core products and services is the way that we have to go. So, by having a more open approach to innovation, it speeds up the adoption rate of new products. It speeds up the go to market strategies, as well as also the internal systems that govern these innovations. We're seeing examples of this from Ericsson, who is using open innovation to accelerate its 5G kit adoption. Another example, and a long-term example for me, is Lego. Lego is actually seeing an increase in the number of creator registrations that allows anyone to design for Lego. So think about how you can start to move your innovation from incremental and insular to something that's a little more open and networked. Besides using open and networked systems, there's an opportunity to build ecosystems, which I know that John is a big proponent of. Ecosystems help to redefine the shape of both organizations and the global economy. As digitalization starts to spread, opportunities for collaboration, for convergence will accelerate and ultimately determine whether an organization ultimately can succeed. Organizations are advancing towards a more interactive relationship that not only draws on their business partners, but also on their customers who can contribute to the creation of the value of the company, or who can co-create new products or services and create a more sustainable model for organizational systems. Now, there are many different ways to create an ecosystem. What you have to do for you and for your company is to identify ways in which you can create a dynamic system, one that allows you access, and that's access to new knowledge, new capabilities, new talent, new technology, and gives you the ability to leverage that access, leverage it to create new markets, leverage it to identify new customer segments, as well as leverage it to create a new future for your business. And Patagonia is a really great example of a company who has created an ecosystem and a secondary market for their products. Customers can sell their products, their used products, and build relationships with other customers. Their ecosystem attracts not only their regular customers, but new customers and distributors as well, providing access to both supply and demand for a whole new secondary market. Think about ways in which you can create an ecosystem that moves your value away from just an app, away from just a platform, and provides this intersection of all of your stakeholders. So before we wrap up, I want to give you one last thing to consider, and that is to be aware of unintended consequences. And I'll give you a non-business example. So in preparation for the Olympics, a coach of a rowing team had his team trained in meditation so that they could be taught to be more aware and enhance their rowing. What happened was not what the coach expected whatsoever, I want to tell you. Yes, the team became more synchronized. However, this caused less resistance, which ultimately led to the team rowing slower. Why? Well, they were more interested in being in harmony with one another, which I could understand that they would want that, rather than winning. So this is just a small example of how everything that we do has a ripple effect. and that could be positive or that could be negative. So if your company continues to market in the same way as it always has, hoping for the same results, well, the unintended consequences may be that your company ends up like this. Or if you continue on the same path doing the same thing, well, you might be disrupted. So why not take some of the things that we talked about today and create a new path? Ultimately, humanity has the impulse to explore. We have the impulse to create. We have the impulse to invent. However, just like any system, there is a transition phase where the old is overtaken by the new. And the big thing here is that we have all grown up and are acclimated to our current business systems that derive their origins from the Industrial Revolution. But now, you, me, all of us, we have an opportunity for new adaptive systems to emerge. And we see these changes to be inevitable, but it's hard to let go. It's uncomfortable. I understand. I get it. I get uncomfortable too, but it's needed. And if we really realize that our businesses are a part of this complex system that is adapting to change, then we understand that we must adapt with it. As Darwin once said, it is not the most intellectual of species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives. But the species that survives is the one that is able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. In order to survive, we too must adapt to our changing environment in which we find ourselves. And we need to know that anything is possible. But ultimately, it is up to you to decide on how you move forward and adapt to this changing environment. Thank you very much.